All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Human Experience Summit 2021. And thank you so much for joining us for this session sponsored by Aduro. Building a culture of psychological safety supports the mental health of your employees. It really, truly does. So thank you so much, Aduro, for being here and presenting. Everyone, the credits will appear in your HR.com account within 2 business days as it has been pre-approved for an HRCI credit. We will send you an email with this information as well. So we invite you to have some engaging conversations in the chat area. Questions for the presenters, please use the Q&A in your webinar controls and type your questions there. All right, it is now my pleasure to get this party started. Passing it over to you, Joshua.
Great. Great to see you, Rosette, Carolyn, and Rhonda. Thank you so much for that. Well, I'll start off by saying I'm super excited about our time together today. This is a man. It's been not only has it been an interesting start to 2021, but my thoughts and my prayers, and I want to say this on behalf of all of us, are with those of you that are dealing with weather that unlike anything we've seen. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. And we even in our own family went several days without power, so I can only imagine what those in Texas and other parts of the country are going through. So our thoughts are with you. So, our time together today is really going to focus on a great conversation between Rosette Cataldo of Workhuman and Carolyn Thayer-Azoff of Aduro around building a culture of psychological safety. Quick background, my name is Josh Templeton. I head up revenue and growth at Aduro. And what I'm excited about is I'm excited about the opportunity to really have some open conversation. And I'm excited about the fact that this is a topic that it's big, it is complex, it requires change, it requires vulnerability, and a lot of those things come natural to some people, and other people it doesn't. And so our hope of coming out of this session today is at the most basic level is that any of you on this are going to get some just thoughtful recommendations and suggestions that you can activate on even as early as tomorrow. So before we jump in, I'd be remiss if I didn't give Carolyn and Rosette an opportunity to not only introduce themselves, but a quick ask of both of you is, I'd love for you to tell us, when you think about psychological safety, what does it actually mean to you? So if we could start off, Carolyn, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give us your thoughts.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everybody. My name is Carolyn Thayer-Azoff, as Josh mentioned. I'm our Senior Director of Mental Health at Aduro. And I have the privilege to focus on our integrated mental health solution, really focused on the fact that well-being and mental health don't belong in silos, they belong together. And specifically a proactive approach to mental health that doesn't actively focuses on mental health, not just in acute states of struggle, but also all the times leading up to it. And, focusing on mental health every day, it can be easy to have it be really kind of front of mind or top. So Josh, I appreciate this question to really bring it home because it impacts all of us. Specifically around psychological safety, I've learned about myself throughout the years that I have the tendency, whether it's because of learned experiences or whatnot, that to keep work and life separate. But I've also learned that although this isn't possible, it's also not healthy and supportive of my performance at work or in my life. And I was reflecting on an example when I stepped into parenthood as a first-time mom a couple of years ago. I was very excited, but I was really hesitant to tell people at work. In fact, it kind of came to a head when I was speaking in front of the company, and a coworker who knew texted me and said, "Carolyn, you got to start telling people. It's getting a little awkward." But, I felt this need to prove that I was going to be the same pre-parenthood. And in fact, I was deeply changed by my experience and my priority of being a mom. And I made the conscious choice, and thanks to a supportive work environment at Aduro, to be okay with this fact. And so, everything from, deciding to take an extra month of leave when I was experiencing postpartum anxiety, to marking pediatrician appointments as visible on my calendar, to, the COVID baby shuffle, as we called it, and just, the comedy in it, and also the real, it was hard. And so I was lucky to have leaders to look up to that really showed up as a professional parent, and also know it's important for myself as a leader to do that as well. And so, through that is one example of how psychological safety has really allowed me to return to work after leave, fully embracing myself and who I am.
That's great. And I appreciate that. Yes, I like the word. I like what you said, the COVID baby shuffle. Yes, I think we've all had those moments, to say the least, for sure. Rosette, I'd love your little bit about you and what your thoughts are around psychological.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to join you. Greatly appreciate it. And hello, everybody. My name is Rosette Cataldo. You may hear some of my friends on the phone call me Ro, but my name is Rosette. And I have the pleasure of working every day for a great organization called Workhuman. And we are in the business of creating human connections between people and organizations with gratitude and continuous feedback, and really moments to say, how do you help each other see great work, recognize great work, and make that be part of the DNA. And I'm a little different than you, Carolyn, in the fact that for me, I have not been able over the years to separate Rosette, the Vice President of Performance and Talent Strategy, from Rosette, the single mom who has, and I have to tell you, there's the COVID teen shuffle as well as the young shuffle. And for me, where psychological safety comes in is being very mindful that, first and foremost, my needs aren't necessarily the needs of everybody else around me, but to bring the vulnerability, the reality of the fact that some days I am not operating at my best, and I can say that, I can show that, I can even pause, and to have a supportive work culture where we really do accept and welcome. And that's what we mean by really a Workhuman centric organization, where the human is in the center. So psychological safety for me is the foundation of how I get my work done. And without that, I can't perform. And I can't wear the multiple hats. It's one hat, and it's Rosette. And it's a unique place and that's a high need I have, to be very candid with you in that area. And that's why this topic is so important to me, and how I've dedicated my career to thinking about, well, if that's what you're trying to create a culture of, then how do you help people perform and achieve in that culture? And that's what I'm looking forward to chatting about today with you all.
I'm thankful that both of you shared a little bit of your backgrounds, and not only as Carolyn, as a woman who is a leader and who is navigating life as a parent with everyone at home, and Rosette is, you're leading a program and a single mom doing it on your own. I can only imagine the challenges that each of you have faced, and the opportunities as well, right? To even rethink how we create these engagement moments with, whether it's our family members, our loved ones, or even those we work with. What struck me as you were both talking about this, and I'm so thankful that you shared those stories, is what we're talking about, right? When you think about psychological safety, my mind goes to, it is not only is it big, it's also, I think it's an important piece, and Carolyn, you touched on this, it can be scary, right? My mind goes to when I first started working. You said it best, Carolyn, like work was work and home was home, and those two things did not commingle. And so when I'm sitting here thinking about, like, okay, well, we're going to try to help individuals really understand what's possible and how do you actually create a culture that has psychological safety in the midst of it. The first thing that I always think about is like, okay, well, what do I do as a leader? What if I actually create this culture and I ask the question, how are you doing? And what if somebody actually answers in the honest state of, I'm not well, or I'm struggling, or, we just went without power for 2+ days. We're low on food and I'm stressing, right? What do you do? And I think that there's this fear, especially when you start creating a culture like this, where people are now going to actually start having open conversations. And so one of the questions that oftentimes comes up, and when you think about creating a culture of psychological safety, is Psychological safety is very innately tied to mental health. And when you start to think about, right, people being their best selves, and I say this right now as I feel like I hopefully you can't hear it, but it sounds like a herd of buffalo upstairs, which are all of our little ones. My wife and I have 4. I hear the feet going all day long. And so I'm wondering, I'm like, I hope they're having fun or something else is afoot. And so there's now this blend between like my mental state and being able to do things and also my day-to-day ability to be excellent at my job. So one question I'd love to ask the both of you, and Carolyn, if you'd be open to maybe jumping in on this, which is, how do you see psychological safety being tied to mental health? And then the question I would want to follow into that, which is, if you're focused on psychological safety and mental health, then Rosette, I start to think about how does that impact performance?
Mhm.
So Carolyn, I'd love to get your thoughts, especially from the mental health lens that you have on your day-to-day.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, psychological safety is, like you said, it's a huge topic. It shows up in a lot of different ways in, inclusion and learning in public, making mistakes, challenging the status quo. And so for our time today, we'll narrow it into mental health. By definition, a psychologically safe work environment is one where we can all show up and employ ourselves without fear of negative consequences. And, we all have mental health, and we don't check our mental health at the door or at the virtual Zoom door when we show up at work. And so, when we say bringing your full self to work, this inherently includes your mental health. It's impossible to separate the two. And when we think about mental health in a psychologically safe work environment, it means that individuals feel safe to talk about their mental health openly without fear of judgment or negative consequences on their in their career or their perception. And why it's so important that we have this as a part of the conversation is that not a lot of people feel psychologically safe. 8 in 10 people don't seek out mental health support because of fear and shame. And while like speaking up will never feel effortless, I don't think for anybody, maybe for some it will, and that's a desire, a hope, but it should feel like the right thing to do, and that it's something that's valued when you are bringing it to your coworker or to your people leader. And so I'm really passionate about this and excited to dig in more today into the conversation.
So when you talk about that definition, you talk about, and I like the way you just said that, right? Which is for some people it'll come naturally, and for others it might not.
Right.
Here's where my mind immediately goes to. Sometimes you have to train them. Sometimes you have to talk about it. Sometimes you have to have a conversation to actually get the ball going. And so when you think about what that means, Rosette, how do you see that mental health state and that ability to have that conversation? How do you see that tying into performance?
Gee, that's a loaded question and a lot there, but let me see if I can kind of pull this apart for you. I want to highlight a couple words you said though, Carolyn, because they're important. You said negative consequences, right? So just think about negative consequences, and then let's think about the word performance. And then let's get into the word performance management. They don't fit together in the same sentence in any way that people are smiling, usually. And then let's think about with the word performance. In order to perform, what do you need? Okay. And I'm going to quote something here from the International Journal of Stress Management. And they talk about emotionally secure employees are the ones that are engaged, productive, and innovative, which is often the yardstick in which we measure performance. So now we're talking about, I need to be engaged, I need to be innovative, I need to perform. But I'm talking now about performance where someone's evaluating me typically, and that's a negative consequence. That's where it's something that's seen as my permanent record. That's something where it's seen as a number or an evaluation.
And it keeps people, to your point, Rosette, it keeps people from actually wanting to do it because you're afraid if you have that conversation, you've put it all out there and you can't take it back.
It's a fight or flight. It's that part of the brain that lights up. And so the fundamentals and what organizations are realizing is if they really want to create cultures that thrive, they have to start working on trust. And trust is the foundation of psychological safety. They have to create belonging. They have to create a safe environment, right? That's all the stuff we're talking about. So one of the first things we're finding and we're seeing is that we're trying to break down the systems that made it so hard to create trust. And the number one thing that I'm seeing organizations do is get back to basics, which is connecting with people. We believe at Workhuman, eye contact is the killer app, and it always will be, even if you're Zoom, even if you're in the room. And then we also remind people that, the golden rule does not apply when you are creating a psychological safe environment. That's really important to remember. It's not necessarily how someone else needs to feel safe. How you need to feel safe is how I can assume you, Josh, need to feel safe. We have to ask the question. We have to ask questions, what's going on? We have to connect with people. When you connect with your manager regularly, all the data show you increase trust by 10%. Immediately with ongoing regular check-ins, which is a major component of performance development. So all of these do weave in together, and it really starts to come back to what I have found the foundation of the trust. And in fact, Google did a big survey and they looked at what are the most productive teams? What is the one thing that they have? And it came down to trust. So I always think of the T in teams as the T in trust. And really bring it down to the basics there. So I hope that was helpful. There's a lot more to add to that, but I hope that gives you a little insight on how this all comes down to performance, because the fight or flight is very tied to performance. Feedback is tied to performance. Evaluation is tied to performance, right? Negative consequences, it erodes all that. And we're talking about psychological safety, which is the removal of the negative consequences. Sounds like a big paradox. But when you establish trust, it all starts to get built.
I love the T in teams is also the T in trust.
I made that up. You can trademark it. Hashtag.
There's a hashtag in there. I love that. I mean, but what's interesting is you're so right. Like if we think about it, it's so funny, right? We started off this whole session talking about creating a culture of psychological safety. With psychological safety, to both of your examples of, one was a parenting example of a little one. The other one was a single mom with two teens and navigating those waters. But what you were just talking about was, it means that you know that you can have this conversation and you know that you're in a safe place. And when you're in a safe place, that means that you know you can trust that the person's going to handle the information that they share in the right way. And they're not going to necessarily go one way or another with it, that there's going to be a thoughtful response. And I love the second piece you touched on there, which also ties back to what Carolyn was talking about, which is getting back to basics. And, it's interesting on Zoom. Zoom is what an amazing tool that we have, right? We've got this ability in each of our homes spread across the United States. Here we are, all of us together, and we're doing this live and we're seeing each other. But here's the flip side of it. We miss the subtleties sometimes, the nuances of body language, of either acceptance or excitement or uncomfortableness.
Yes.
And so you're now forced to, you have to ask questions, because what we all do is the same thing, is we're looking at the camera and we're smiling. And we're trying to be strong and resilient. Carolyn, you look like you want to chime in on that.
No, I think that, it goes back to what Rosette was saying about checking in. And it sounds so simple. And I think that is a theme that's already coming through, is, keeping the human, it's a human experience, and really keeping the human at the center of it all. Yeah.
So the question I would now go to, okay, so I'm listening to both of you talk about this. I'm like, okay, I get that. That makes sense. Like, okay, we need to build, the T in teams is also the T in trust. We need to get back to the basics. We know that psychological safety is rooted in individuals' mental health.
Yes.
So the next question I go to is, we've all three of us have now said this is a really big subject. Mm-hmm. Where do you start? Where do you even begin, right? I think about, okay, today's Thursday. I think it's Thursday. It is Thursday. It's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. And I'll give you a good example. My son asked me this question or made a statement to me, and I said he was having a rough day. And I said, well, tomorrow's going to be a new day. And what he said to me was, and it caught me, and he said, you say that all the time, Daddy, but it's never a new day. It's always the same. And it struck me for two reasons, because what it struck me as was, not only is it impacting him, but it also struck me as I need to think about what are the tools I give him so he can have a fresh start tomorrow. So Rosette, I would love your thoughts. What would be something that individuals on this call today could think about where they could say, you know what, here's step one for me when I think about creating a culture of psychological safety?
Okay, great question. So I think one of the first things comes back to not assuming you understand that psychological safety for Carolyn is the same thing as psychological safety for you. So really, first and foremost, being brave and being vulnerable, and not just asking people how they are, but asking them, what do they need? How can I support you? What does it look like? If I'm to support you, Carolyn, what does that look like? If you're having difficulty, how do you want to share that with me? Sometimes people find that they can type it better than they can say it. The other thing is to not necessarily act like you are, if let's just say you're the people leader, that you are the one that needs to fix it all, but to empower, to ask for feedback yourself so that people understand that your walls are permeable and you are able to show your vulnerability. So what I have found and what organizations are doing is putting the employee in a much more empowered state where they're given permission to raise their hand when they're having a tough time of it, or when they're flourishing and when they are really doing their best. And to then empower each other and say, you know what? Not only are you on the lookout for you, but you're on the lookout for me, and I'm on the lookout for you, Josh. And start to remove this I and try to replace it more with the we. So I've seen that also work. I've even seen some organizations come down to the fact where they discuss norms on how the team's going to handle things to create, with the end goal in mind, greater trust and psychological safety. How are we going to handle conflict? We all work together to put, our meeting thoughts for this. How are you going to handle conflict? How are you going to handle feedback? How are we going to celebrate successes? Don't forget, celebration also creates less stress, which helps to create greater opportunity for trust and connectedness and safety. So those are a few. Those are probably like 3 or 4 off the bat. I hope that didn't rattle off too quickly.
No,
are some of the off the top of my head. I mean, I can.
No, not at all. You said something. You said a couple things in there. What's interesting, yesterday we had a really great session with the leader of benefits and well-being at Bon Secours Mercy Health. And interestingly enough, when she closed the session, one of the comments she made to everyone was, we asked her the question, I said, what would be something that you'd want everyone to focus on tomorrow? And the word she said, Rosette, and you didn't know this, was, she said, don't be afraid to be brave, and don't be afraid to be bold. Yeah. And I love the second piece that you then dovetailed into, which was being open to ask the question, what support do you need? And actually, it was interesting, a question just came through from the audience, which was, Paula just asked this question, which she said, well, how do I teach my management not to think that you're fragile, or that you are any less, I'm going to add a little to her question, any less of a thoughtful contributor, any less of a person as they're going through mental health moments. And I think that really dovetails nicely into what I would want to get perspective on from you, Carolyn, which is, so you're teeing up, right, from Rosette's example, you're going to tee up this conversation. My mind goes to, there's a lot of pre-existing thoughts that exist with these moments. Walk me through your thought process how do you tackle that moment when someone says, I'm struggling? What are some of the challenges that you're going to see or that you're going to run into when that happens?
Yeah, Paula, thank you for that question. And I think, if we were to spend this hour together today and not touch on the fact that all individuals have unique experiences and perspectives on mental health. We all do. And so making the assumption that we all are on the same page about that is we'll miss the mark. And stigma is a big topic that is around mental health.
Yes.
And what does stigma do? It drives silence and exclusion and labeling. And stigma is formed through our own personal experiences, our cultures, our lived experiences. And so I think, Paula, to your question around how do we train, how do we train people leaders to not think that it's a weakness, or I think it's recognizing that we all have our own perspectives and bringing that into the conversation. And normalizing that and humanizing that. None of us are immune to that. We all in life show up with bias and stigma. And so using it as an opportunity to be vulnerable and then to educate. And Rosette, you touched on empowering people leaders. And that word empower is so important throughout in this entire conversation. More companies are training people leaders, I think, on supporting the mental health of their team members. I think typically they might cover things like, how do I recognize struggle and how do I support team members in their struggle? And a really important part of supporting team members is both for the leader and their boundaries and self-care and ability to show up, and for the person is the importance of empowerment. People leaders are not expected to know all the answers and solve all the problems. And we're actually going to have a conversation at, I think, 1 p.m. Pacific on compassionate leadership, which is a really important part of that conversation. And making sure that this conversation that we're having today around psychological safety is not missed in the people leader empowerment part of the equation, and in your trainings, for example. Mm-hmm. If that's, I believe, Aduro, we believe that that's the foundation, is psychological safety. And so how can leaders lead by example to build psychological safety? Are leaders, vulnerable? Are they seeking out feedback? Are they learning out loud? And at Aduro, we've adopted this, I'm speaking in draft thinking phrase.
Right.
And so that's a really important part of training people leaders, which is more from a culture side of it. And then secondly is making sure that we're also taking care of our people leaders and their mental health. This is not a you conversation. This is something that we all are experiencing and struggling in some way. And so making sure that whether it be through traditional self-care like exercise and diet and sleep, and also through things like clarity on boundaries, the expectations of people leaders as well, are a few things that come up for me is, Josh, to your point, things that companies might be able to do tomorrow to respond and to support employees.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say one thing, may I, excuse me, Josh, is you brought up a tremendous amount of great nuggets there. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot, and I'm hearing a lot from talent leaders around the world, is we rely so much on the managers. We have to start there, but we can't end there. So when COVID began, I noticed there was a tremendous amount of organizations realizing that the manager wasn't the center of the universe anymore. HR couldn't carry the burden. So how do we help employees? And they did something as simple as, and I'm seeing this becoming common now, is buddy systems, where it's really much more of on the ground, employees in the trenches working together, feeling as though that they too have the responsibility. And I'm also seeing in the world of performance, where we talk so much about you should have a conversation, you should have a check-in, that they're specifically saying, have a conversation and I'm going to help guide you back to the manager guidance. I always come back that it has to be some skill set. You have to give them some tool set, right? And they have to have the right mindset to do this, right? So the organization has to support those 3 pillars. But I'm going to help you have even 3 bullets on how to have a well-being conversation. So it's all of that coming together, continue on everything that you said. And it's about time we're putting a spotlight on this. And, COVID just made this seem, amplify it, but it's always been there. This need has always been there.
Rosette, I love that. And, thinking about leaders as leaders, yes, are people leaders, but there are leaders throughout the company, and a really great example in what we've seen is, employee resource groups.
Yes.
Those are communities within organizations that, that have shared experiences. I'm a part of our women at Aduro. And I look forward to it every month because it's a safe place to share experiences and to learn from each other. And anyway, so I think that's a very important point as well. Yeah.
It's interesting when you think about, right, these, as you said, Rosette, right, these small spaces, right, these places where you can be authentic, you can be yourself. It also makes me think about, right, like sometimes you're on these larger group meetings or you're in these larger sessions and it doesn't provide you or afford you the opportunity to be vulnerable, right? And so you're right, like you do need to have these advocates throughout your organization. It's actually something we talk about very frequently with our own clients, which is, do you have champions within your organization that can help you be those advocates? Because think about it, right, at the most basic level, where do the conversations actually happen? It doesn't happen when there's 25 people on a Zoom meeting.
No.
It happens when Rosette is talking with Carolyn in a one-on-one and they're having an authentic, vulnerable moment. And they, all of a sudden, Carolyn, who maybe she's one of the champions in her program or in her organization, says, you know what, Rosette, we actually have some amazing resources, or let me tell you about what I went through.
Yes.
So that goes back to the very thing you're both talking about, which is this culture of psychological safety. Everybody's got to be participating. And I love the way you said it, Carolyn. A leader doesn't just mean a leader with the title of a leader. You have leaders throughout your organization. And one question I'd put to the group on the call today is, are you tapping into those leaders? Are you tapping into those individuals, those boots on the ground that are engaging with your people? It made me think about, I don't know if for those of you that have taken a minute through this read, Deloitte pushed out in their human capital trends analysis for 2021, which has a trove of amazing data points around what's going on, what are the trends that are going to be impacting organizations and individuals over the year ahead. And one of the pieces that jumped out at me was on page 15 of their analysis. They did an analysis across executives, and they also did an analysis across individual workers. And what it said was, the question was around workers prioritizing transforming work for well-being more than executives. And so the question was, what are the most important outcomes that you hope to achieve in your work transformation efforts in the next 1 to 3 years? That was the question. And so they ranked it from 1 to 9. And the categories ranged from customer experience, innovation, reducing costs, all the way through doing new work, growing market share, improving worker well-being, and increasing social impact. So this very wide range of categories. Senior executives ranked, out of those 9 items, they ranked number 8 was improve worker well-being. That's what the executives within this organization, within this study. The individual workers with the same categories ranked it as 3rd.
Yep.
The 3rd most important thing that they could focus on, which dovetails into another interesting data point that came out of a great HR piece around the fact that 80% of organizations today have recognized that COVID-19 has materially impacted their employees from a mental health perspective. Yet less than 60% have actually even thought about or have begun attempting to address the problem. So the first thing I go to is, we just talked about, okay, well, what are some areas where you could start? When you start to think about fostering this culture, Rosette, one thing I would love to get your perspective on is, what are some of the tools that you could leverage when you start thinking about, right, this idea of creating, these networks and these ecosystems? what are some additional areas that you could start thinking in when you start thinking about, right now we've got a misalignment. You've got leaders thinking one thing, you've got employees thinking someone else. How do you
Right.
get all that together in one place?
Great question. Okay, so lots there. First off, that Deloitte study is fantastic. And one of the things Deloitte did say was it's time that we get, the word human capital. We need to focus on the human.
Mm,
And Deloitte also has a chief well-being officer, which is also an amazing movement forward in saying that, you know what, we believe that we need to focus on the well-being of our employees. And it's a bold statement back to the original words we talked about, bold, right? But what I'm finding organizations are doing in its simplest, first and foremost, is they're giving permission from the top to say, A, this is important to us. B, this is going to be part of our culture. And let me share with you how it's going to be part of our culture. First and foremost, we want to create cultures of something simple. Let's start with the simple stuff. It's not hard to say, great job, well done. I saw you, I noticed you. I'm going to share a moment of gratitude, positive feedback with you. So that is what I would say the simplest way to create a foundation of connectedness, which creates trust.
mm,
But what people don't always know is that's a very strategic approach to transformation and to creating psychological safety. So Dr. Robert Emmons wrote a book. And in this book, he spoke about what gratitude does to the individual, emotional benefits, psychological benefits, social benefits, all with what we talked about earlier, create greater engagement. So I'd say the foundational, easy, low-hanging fruit, think about ways to say thank you, ways to incorporate it. Other things that we're seeing, definitely much more frequent check-ins. We have insights into frequency of check-ins happening with our clients here at Workhuman, and we saw a 153% increase in the number of check-ins happening. These are one-on-one meetings with your manager when COVID began. So understanding that there's a need, and that need, yes, it will drive performance. We do have a yardstick. I understand why the managers put it, the people leaders put well-being at the bottom, because they're thinking about all the metrics that need to be measured. Where they're being short-sighted is realizing that if we don't have the humans on solid ground with the safety, which feeling as though their basic needs are met, let's just think of Maslow, they're not going to be able to produce. So that's another thing that we're seeing is find ways where you can have more frequent conversations. Using tools like what Aduro, coaching, education, all of that creates opportunity, once again, back to the skill set and the mindset and the tool set to give people what they need so that they're empowered and they don't feel like they're doing it alone. And we mentioned it, but I have to say it again, lead by example. And everyone is a leader, so well said. Everyone is. So lead by example. You're having a vulnerable moment, you need to swallow hard, it's acceptable. Show that so that other people can follow. So those are some of the quick things that I see organizations are doing, creating culture where people get permission to give feedback. So those are some of the basic things, Josh. I hope that was helpful.
No, it was, and the statistic of the frequency of check-ins that it jumped
Amazing.
153% through COVID. And I'm sure if you even looked at what most organizations are navigating through, right, which is people are now, what that tells me is not only the importance of it, but what it also tells me is there's a desire for it. People don't want to do meetings just to do meetings.
No, but this happens when you empower and it's not on the shoulders of the manager. So let me be really clear. That doesn't mean that the manager was tapping on the shoulder and
Right.
saying, I am Rosette's manager, let's meet. You have to create it where the employee can say, hi, I need to connect as well. But here's the sad part. There's other data out there from Gallup that said, over 45% of employees felt as though their company didn't care about their well-being during this COVID crisis. So once again, we know that employees have this need, but there's a perception. So we have to create systems that don't inhibit people from feeling like they can connect. The connection creates the trust. The trust creates the performance. This is how it all builds.
What I'd like to do, we have about 10 minutes left. What I'd love to do is maybe take a little bit of a turn as we've been talking about not only this, really what you've been talking about is you've been talking, both of you, at length about not only creating this environment, but what I'm also hearing, right, is that there's a muscle that has to be developed here, right? There's a routine that needs to be built. And I love the way you talked about it, Rosette, right? It's got to not only be from the top down, but it's also got to be the bottom up. What I'd love to do maybe is take that conversation point, and what I'm hearing out of this is it not only needs to be an organizational focus, and right, do you have the right tools? Do you have the right partners? Do you have the right infrastructure to actually do this?
Yes.
But then the second piece is you've also got to create an individualized process, right? You've got to create a way where you're meeting each individual where they are at. Some people are going to be unbelievably vulnerable. Some people are going to be like, I am not ready to do that. And I've been hard-coded and trained to never talk about this for the last 30 plus years.
Yes.
One, you talked a lot about this actionable step of listening to your people. Carolyn, I'd love to get your thoughts on what you've seen companies do around their mental health focus as a business priority, because I think there's some real power in what people might be able to get from that.
Absolutely. And I guess, first I might add a third onto that, into your list of resources and culture, but also, we hear all the time from our clients that we're offering resources, but people aren't taking advantage of them. And so I would suggest get curious about why. Why might people not be taking advantage of resources? And I think that ties to culture and environment. And also, how can we take the mental health out of the shadows and build it into familiar, trusted experiences? So into ERG conversations, into one-on-ones, into your well-being program. That is, I think, a third layer. Is it's great to offer it, but are people actually taking advantage of it? And if not, what might be behind that, and how can we deliver it in a way so that people do? So just in terms of, you had asked about the impact on business initiatives, correct, Josh? Yeah. And we've seen in our data, perhaps unsurprisingly to people attending this topic or this session, is that emotional health is the strongest predictor of overall well-being. And intuitively, that makes sense. And stress, loneliness, and depression are the most predictive. And a theme that, again, I think we coming back to is each organization starts in a different place. And it's important that we're ready to listen. And so there are, technology and tools that can help us listen. We look at flourishing and human performance and well-being. But as you're launching these business initiatives, it's important to listen to where your company is. So I think about a example of a client that they launched a leader mental health training, and immediately it was clear that the belief was that the fact that work and life are together just wasn't resonating. So they needed to start there, normalizing mental health, addressing the stigma head on, and really those building blocks and understanding where your organization needs to build from. And so that would be, just an overall lens of the impact on business initiatives. If mental health is a business priority to you, listen at the team level, at the individual level, and at the organizational level, and then start there.
Yes.
What would be, building off of that, right? And I wrote that down because I think it's such a great data point and an important one, which what you said was emotional health is the biggest overall predictor to employee well-being. And that immediately gets me going into this place of, we talked about it a second ago, there's got to be a practice, right? You've got to practice this. Like you can't just assume that your people, like, one of the questions earlier was, if we do a training, Well,
Yeah.
great. How do we know that everyone's going to be on board and jumping in and running with it? My mind goes to Rosette is you've set this psychological safety culture up and you've set it up as a standard practice. How do you make sure that your people are working that muscle group? How, from a performance perspective, how do you do that in a way where, you know, everybody can access it and they know that it's there and they know there's that expectation that it's going to be there? You talked about it, right? That where people felt empowered to actually proactively schedule meetings. How do you get to that place? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is does the company have an appetite? Does the organization have an appetite? And will they put this as the North Star or one of the North Stars for the culture? And then be very realistic that this is a transformation process. This is not, pixie dust in a flip of a switch. And then tomorrow we are all, voila, uh, psychologically safe, flourishing, right? And ready to rock and roll. Think about even with your son, right? What's the difference between today and tomorrow and yesterday? So what we need to do is help today and tomorrow and yesterday feel a little different by, back to the words we used, empowering, by giving permission often. So often with transformation that I'm part of with organizations, they think that, one video giving permission or one user guide or one micro learning or training is all that we need. And even if they're not, that short-sighted, they think we'll do another communication a quarter from now. This has to be a topic that is discussed. And I think that's why, Carolyn, organizations sometimes don't want to listen. So I think one of the starting points is listening. Don't be afraid to take the pulse survey. Don't be afraid to look under the hood and really understand what's going on, because those organizations that do absolutely do impact the bottom line differently. So what we can do immediately, once again, is acknowledge and listen and then acknowledge, I should say. Educate, give permission ongoingly, and I would say find one or two new norms that you can incorporate tomorrow, whether it is your job every time you engage with someone as part of the organization here to ask, how are you? How are you? And then, of course, find systems that give people resources. People need resources more than ever right now, and they need to feel as though it's okay to tap into the resources. That's going to shift everything we're talking about today and help us get through this. And don't forget, we're talking about, we've been talking about COVID. We haven't even talked about all the other things that our employees have been dealing with.
Right.
All the social injustice, everything that is now in our we used to be outside is now inside our organizations more than ever. And it's been in our organizations. We just didn't see
That's
it,
right.
by the way. I don't want to
That's right.
sound like, naive to this.
That's right. Carolyn, we have just a few moments left. I'd love your thoughts on just some great call outs by Rosette. Just a couple thoughts on what you might want your, anyone listening in to take away from today and even action on quickly.
Yeah, clearly we could spend the whole day on this topic. And Josh, thanks for keeping us focused, semi-focused at least. What's standing out to me out of this conversation is that we all have a role to play in this, and that we all can be leaders in this conversation and in this really cultural movement. That is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's a muscle that we all can be empowered to build. And, by nature of us all being a part of it, it's, meeting people where they are. And, we really are at Aduro, we focus on a coaching mindset. And I think that that's really what it comes down to is empowerment, leading with a growth mindset. And that it's exciting to think about the role that we all can play and how can we empower others to do the same.
And I'll just say this in the last minute. I think those are some amazing call outs is know that for everyone that's on this call right now is that you actually have advocacy and partnership. So whether it's, as Rosette noted, right, whether it's the tools and the resources you have today, or maybe you don't, remember that you can leverage the tools through whether it's Workhuman and their amazing suite of services around recognition and performance, or whether it's driving a culture of well-being where your employees are able to focus on their best selves each and every day. Know that you have advocacy and that you can talk with us and we can help you kind of go through those waters. But I'd be remiss if I didn't just say thank you so much, Rosette and Carolyn, for taking time out of your day. I hope this was a great session for everyone. And with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Rhonda, to wrap us up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Josh, to Carolyn, and Rosette. What a fantastic presentation, as always. Very important, very valuable. Thank you all for joining us. And whenever the session ends, please take a moment to fill out the exit survey. It's going to open in a new browser on your computer. So just take a moment to fill that out for us at hr.com and the folks at Aduro. So thank you so much again to the folks at Aduro, and have a great day, everyone, the rest of it, or great night, wherever you're calling in from. Take really good care of yourself for now. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.